Jaschik, and we're going to talk, I'm going to talk with a distinguished panel, some of whom you've already met, about some of the issues I raised this morning, other issues. Then we'll get you all into the discussion as well, so be thinking of questions that you have. I am joined by, to my left, to my immediate left, Ellen Treanor from Southern Utah University. Then to her immediate left, Ian Mortimer from RIT. But the large Nazareth contingent here has asked me to also identify him as a recent Nazareth alum, I guess you could say. So,
well done.
So they want some credit for him as well. Then we have Kathy Woughter from Alfred, who you heard just before lunch, and then Stephanie Geyer from Ruffalo No. ELEVATE. And while the first three who I mentioned will be speaking from the perspective of their campuses, Stephanie can speak from the perspective of the many campuses that Ruffalo No. ELEVATE works with. So I wanted to start off by asking you all sort of on the core issue of making the class, of attracting enough students and making the model work financially. What are you experiencing this year? And what are you nervous about? We'll start with you, Ellen.
Great, thanks very much. So making the class, because it is every single year making that class. I think what we're really moving toward is trying not to be all things to all people. We are a comprehensive regional, but I think that students are really looking for a good fit. So I think the clearer we are about who we are, the easier it is for students to either choose us or not choose us. So I think in terms of messaging, we've been getting clear about who we are. So we will have now, this will be our 4th year of record enrollments for full-time, first-time freshmen, and our retention rates are up. So we are kind of bursting at the seams at Southern Utah University.
Well, and you're also in a state with population growth, which
yes.
Helps. Many people here who are from the Northeast are dealing with shrinking local populations.
Yes.
How much pressure, how much have you grown in recent years?
I founded the office in 2015, and we were mired at around 7,000, and it had been stagnant or falling for about 12 years. So we turned it around, and now we're just above 10,000. So, and with the help of RNL, we've been able to capture a lot of the demographic targets that we're looking at, and we've realized that we will probably have continued enrollments until 2024, when I think everything starts falling apart.
Well, enjoy the next few years. Ian, I know you're new at RIT, but how are things looking at RIT?
Very well. The enrollment health at both Nazareth and RIT is looking very good for the fall, and I would argue good for the next couple of years based on the metrics that are in place. I think some of the work that we've done to kind of think about the class, not as a class as a whole, but really break it up into manageable parts. One of the things, and we talked about it this morning, is that you have to make a choice whether you're a product differentiator or a brand differentiator. And trying to play in the brand differentiation space is very, very difficult without a ton of money or some kind of reputation building practice, i.e. Big time sports or pedigree, et cetera. And so one of the things that, again, I think we've done well is take 2,000 students or 20,000 students and really look at how promotion price, the product competitiveness within the categories rolls up into an overall enrollment number. And by doing that, we then can kind of see where do we have to put time and effort, where are we going to fall short, where are we going to exceed, and that also helps with academic planning as well. So rather than delivering a class, really delivering 8 classes based on different value drivers that they use to decide on where to enroll.
Well, and I guess just following up on that, who do you think of as your top overlap institutions in terms of students looking at RIT and other places?
Yeah, so we actually just looked at this not too long ago, and our top 15 overlap are a combination of big publics, so places like Penn State, Maryland, et cetera. Because of our pedigree, being founded as a co-op school, we overlap with Northeastern and Drexel. And then also, based on our engineering and technology bend, we overlap with WPI, Carnegie Mellon on the super high end, but really co-op, large public, and then kind of niche engineering type places.
And especially because you're in in the state of Excelsior,
Yep.
what percentage of RIT students are from New York State?
Right now, a little less than half.
A little less than half.
Yeah.
Shifting to Kathy, just from Alfred's perspective, how is this year going? What are top issues on your mind?
Sure, and I'm the Vice President for Student Affairs, not Enrollment Management, so I want to make that clear. If my colleague in Enrollment Management were here, he would have more specific details. We set a pretty aggressive target for our first-time, full-time, our undergraduate student population, and we are very close to reaching that. Where we're exceeding our goals is transfer and graduate by quite a bit more than we thought, which is pretty great. In terms of and our international student population as well is an area that we're making some inroads very recently, like after that May 1 deadline, like you were talking about before. I think what's top of mind for me, is less. Again, my enrollment colleague would have probably some different answers. For me, it's trying to provide the support to the students who are coming in. You may have seen earlier, we're bringing in a population that needs quite a bit of support, financial and otherwise. So providing that support once they're on our campus, that's a challenge. That keeps me up at night. Athletics, we are trying to revise our mix of athletics. We have a lot of sports, very large football team. And we have sort of underrepresentation in some of our other rosters that could take more, and so we're trying to, in effect, wean ourselves from football as a wonderful enrollment driver that it is, and to try to kind of right size the size of our football team, because we know that we think there's room in some other areas. So that's really top of mind, is how to manage that and still meet our enrollment goals. And then we talked about brand. We just finished up a major brand invigoration, and we really hadn't had much branding on our campus for years. So trying to put into place, understanding that the brand that our enrollment team is out there promoting is important, and I feel it is representative, but is that what our student and academic affairs is going to deliver? Is that what we can deliver? We need to make sure that those are connected and congruent.
What is the brand that high school seniors are hearing about from Alfred? What are they being told?
Hopefully what they're being told is that we're a place that values the outdoors, that we are historically diverse and we value diversity, that we're focusing on ceramics as a key driver to many of our programs, but of course not the only driver. And did I mention the outdoors? We are in a beautiful rural place, and we want to attract people that value that and that love it, and kind of want to be connected and well while they're going to school.
And actually, I'm curious about that, because some of the conventional wisdom that I hear these days is that students all want to be in Manhattan or Boston. Is that a harder sell now, do you think, than it used to be? Are there enough people who don't want to be in a city?
Well, I mean, again, I'm not on the ground
Right.
where admissions counselors are. I can tell you that the students that do choose to come to Alfred University, they tend to love it. So they've come here many times from the city seeking a place to focus and a place where it's quieter. Students, they learn to fish, they learn to hike. They find that they really love that solitude. It doesn't mean they want to live in a rural place forever, but for that time, they really love it. So I think it goes back to what you were saying, that schools need to find their niche. And we're never going to be Manhattan. We have one stoplight and in the whole town, and we need to find people who love that, and they're out there.
They are, definitely. Stephanie, what sort of trends are you seeing nationally with R&L clients in terms of this year's class?
Sure. A couple of things. I think I'll take the perspective of our clients themselves and the challenges that they're struggling with, and maybe things that you all are dealing with too. I think the cyclical nature of what we do, we're bringing in the class, and gosh, then what do? We work on the next one. And one of the challenges that we still see with our clients and friends all around the US and Canada is that we never take a moment to take a breath, or B, look at the data to see what really worked. It's just on to the next, on to the next. And I bet you all live like that too, right? But to be effective marketers, we have to close the loop. We have to begin with research, we have to end with research. And so simple things like looking at the completeness of your Google Analytics implementation, using Data Studio to curate KPIs and dashboards for the grown-ups that you report to is the answer, is the way through. And then we can look to see, well, what yield did we get from effective search engine optimization? Or we're now trying paid interactive marketing, geofencing, retargeting, all the things, right? What worked? So measuring is, I think, the mission and the trend that we're trying to support folks with, and that we still see a lot of challenge.
Is that hard to do that kind of analysis? Because just about any college, and I bet all these folks out here probably have 10 initiatives going at once. So you don't have, and no self-respecting enrollment management VP is going to say, well, I'm going to have a control group and I'm going to do nothing new for 50% and see what happens. So how do you tell, if you're doing all these things, what made the difference?
Sure, I mean, benchmarking, so again, going back to analytics, Google just came out with this new multi-channel benchmarking resource so that we can see a user who maybe enters first in a mobile, comes back around through on a desktop or laptop is genius, so a gift there. You do have to do a little bit of testing and experimentation. I'm a fan of the pilot. I was just in a company-wide staff meeting with Sumit, our new CEO, and he has this really great fail fast initiative and challenge for us in developing new services and products to support you all. And he's saying, go, try things out and be okay with, hey, that didn't work, let's move on, but have great measurements. So I think, piloting here and there rather than setting aside a precious pile of students and ignoring them just for good methodology, I wouldn't go that far.
Yes, please.
I think one of the things also that you can get into a trap on is having every tactic roll up into an enrollment. Like, so to take, demand creation as an example, if the tactic creates an inquiry, then that's a check. Mm-hmm. And not necessarily may create an enrollment. There's other pieces of that process that potentially may be successful or unsuccessful in making that happen. So in terms of the quantifiable metrics, I think we got to be careful to kind of align those with really specific goals that may not go all the way through the funnel, but maybe that's just demand creation, that's just engagement, that's just satisfaction, with the hopes that if you do all those things right, then you have a student demand.
I couldn't agree more. And if you are managing not to the end goal of, person in a chair, but to, hey, how about if we work on focusing on improving the volume of inquiries that we have, or improving campus visits, you see then opportunity to shape classes, to grow them differently by different tactics.
It is very odd to see what will lead to change. Just wrote about a fascinating study that was done by some economists who wanted to look at what happens to colleges that are subject to Title IX investigations and that are public. And the theory was that these colleges were all going to pay a price. And in fact, what he found is that on average, if you're investigated by the Ed Department for handling of sex assaults, your applications go up, including applications by women. Now, he's not saying that, they didn't say that was why they went up, but they were actually sort of theorizing that any attention is good attention. But it just shows how tricky this is, because no one's going to say, oh, I hope I have a Title IX investigation on my campus. But you have that, and it's really, really odd. I wanted, since we have Ian and Kathy are both from STEM-oriented institutions. And of late, there's been discussion about women in STEM, particularly with some saying, well, we're just not going to get more women in STEM, and others pointing to real success there. And I'm wondering, in your experience, how much is that a focus at RIT and Alfred, and are you having success? Ian?
Yeah, at RIT, it's absolutely a focus, and part of it is that it's important for the community to be diverse from a lot of perspectives. The other piece to it is that when you look at the number of women and their performance in high school compared to men, it's an economic decision as well as a community decision. So we have affinity groups within our schools of engineering and technology that are designed to build community for women, but also obviously integrate within the whole environment in and of itself. And then also within our admissions and marketing area, there's tactics to build groups and to, again, make the experience of studying engineering or technology at a place like RIT as positive as possible and take some of the stereotypes out of that experience as best we can.
Kathy, what are you seeing?
Yeah, so we're seeing similar success, and part of it is leadership. We've had female engineering deans for years, and so of course that helps a lot when you've got women at the top who are role models. We also are fortunate that we have a women's leadership center, which also provides leadership programming for all genders, but the cornerstone is women, and we've had some partnerships between our Women's Leadership Center and our School of Engineering to successfully acquire some National Science Foundation grants to create some of those women in engineering type programs, and so that from scholarships all the way through to leadership development. And so those have been really successful. There is a lot of funding out there, I think, for initiatives like this, and so for us, we do see that. Yes, it's a narrative out there. I think there's nowhere to go but up, and schools like RIT and like Alfred University are showing that it's possible to meet that demand and to provide a welcoming environment for women in STEM fields.
And I guess, sorry, did you want to?
I think also one of the things also you're getting to data and to the truth of of the demographics. So we have a big game design program. And part of it, the stereotypes is that gamers are students who sit in their basements and are on consoles all day, right? And they're men. And when you look at actually the facts, the heaviest users of games are women, except for they're much more using it on mobile. And so it's really getting to the truth in terms of what does the demographic look for, and not allow stereotypes to get in the way of messaging or tactics to attract them.
And yet, in some cases, universities that have shifted slightly away from that image are having success. Georgia Tech was having low numbers of women in computer science, and they found that their male students were very gaming focused. They shifted some of their activities toward robots that would help people, like help people with disabilities, and showed that this technology can be arguably more meaningful than a game. Right. No insult to the gamers out there. And their female enrollments went way up. And so it wasn't a lack of women with the brains for it. Or the interest. It was just different things. I guess shifting broadly, diversity is a challenge in many ways, for many kinds of colleges. And it plays out differently in different parts of the country with different state demographics. Ellen, when you think of diversity at Southern Utah, what populations are you thinking about, and what kinds of strategies do you pursue?
Well, if you know anything about the demographics of Utah, there's a predominant religion,
yes.
And there's prominent demographics. So attracting diverse populations has been quite a challenge. And the president of the university, Scott Woughter, actually at the opening about 2 years ago said, we had a professor that had applied, an African-American professor, and so I called HR to say, hey, let's get together with some of the African-American faculty. And they said, we don't have any. And he said, okay, that's just not okay. And so he immediately went out and put a search out for a chief diversity officer who we hired in this last year. And I think she's been really helping raise the awareness around the university. I came from Washington, D.C. I can't imagine that there isn't diversity everywhere, but at Utah it has been quite a struggle. So, and I think it's important because in some states
Native Americans may be the largest target group from those who are in the state. As you look at particularly the Latino population spreading to many more states than historically it's been in, lots of institutions, I think, are being forced to rethink what diversity means at their institutions. Stephanie, do you notice any trends among the many institutions you work with in terms of what their goals are, how they're achieving them?
It is very popular and common for institutions to say, and we need to fix diversity or shape diversity, change it. But I think diversity comes in a lot of different forms. And I really appreciated so much what you said this morning about the opportunity to emphasize transfer student. And I think that is the place where we're more likely to more handily make strides in ethnic diversity too. As the mother of a kid who is probably starting at community college and then hopefully transferring on for a 4-year degree, I'm really excited to see institutions take that kind of diversity approach too, not just the standard shiny, happy, recent high school graduate.
And certainly we're seeing it, I mean, in California, where the public universities are banned from considering race and ethnicity, and the numbers of African American students are quite low. Through transfer admissions, they're boosting them significantly, and they're having more success there than with freshmen. Kathy, you mentioned transfer enrollments up as well. What does diversity play a factor there?
It does, but it's more of a factor for us in our incoming student population in terms of our diversity. For me, again, from a student life perspective, I'm really interested in growing the cultural competence of the faculty and staff on campus, so that when we bring in our students who are different from any individual person, they have the competence to interact. I want to address issues of fragility. A lot of our faculty and staff feel as though they're allies, and they feel like, I'm doing good work, I'm trying, and are very hurt when someone comes to them and talks to them about a microaggression that they committed. And so some of that is really just digging into very basic cultural competence issues. I think that's important. For us on campus, I mentioned we're growing our population of international students, particularly Muslim students. And so for us, I think religious diversity is going to be something we really need to think about and talk more about. At our institution in particular, we have an awful lot of students who don't identify with any religion at all. And so, that's the predominant identification is not coming from a faith-based kind of worldview. So religious diversity is new, and also I feel that my responsibility, along with my colleague in enrollment management, is to also work with our local community. We're in a community that doesn't experience a lot of diversity, particularly religious diversity, and so going out, I've been making the rounds to local chambers of commerce, working with business owners and kind of saying, hey, how can you help me? We're bringing in more and more students who perhaps look different or worship differently, or perhaps might, wear clothing that you're not familiar with, or that you have associations with that are not correct or true. And how can we work together to welcome our students into your communities? And so that's been a really positive set of steps over the summer that we've been taking that I think is going to grow into some wonderful initiatives for our county as well, as they start to integrate and look at the way that the county talks about tourism and talks about what they do and what they're good at.
Well, and I think looking at the community is so important. We wrote this year about a professor, a Latino professor at a private college in North Carolina who quit and moved to another university. She said her university was incredibly supportive and she loved it, but when her husband and kids were in town, they were getting nasty remarks, and she did not want to raise her children in that environment. And so the boundaries of campus are awfully porous if you care about creating a welcoming environment. Ian, what does the broader diversity front look like at RIT?
Well, it's visible diversity, it's religious diversity, and then we also have a very unique perspective on the definition because of our deaf and hard of hearing population. So RIT is the home to NTID, which is the National Technical Institute for the Deaf. And so, in my short time at RIT, one of the things that has been really cool to observe is how those communities have come together and they integrate really, really well. One of the things that our tour guides will tell prospective students is that there's great job opportunities in being note takers and helping students who may be struggling in terms of translating what's going on in the classroom. And by result of being with someone unlike you, you start getting some empathy built, and it's really, really cool to watch.
That's great. I want to talk briefly about sort of the curriculum and how that comes into play. And Ellen, I know Southern Utah we've written about, and I've been on panels where you've talked about, has this great gen ed program. And I wonder if you could talk about that, and I guess the question of, do students pay attention to the curriculum, or prospective students pay attention to the curriculum when they're making their college choices?
Thank you for that nice little plug. We have a program called JumpStart that allows students to complete all of their general education requirements in 2 semesters. And they start as cohorts, and they have different themes. And it's been tremendously successful. Our retention rate on the JumpStart students is approaching 100%. So it's the model, although it doesn't follow the revenue base because it's 8 professors and 48 students. It is an extraordinary experience for the students, and it's extraordinary experience for the professors who are suddenly reinvigorated by being able to integrate with all these other professors. So I don't think it's number 1 when the students start looking at it, but when they look at the university and then so it's not, if we're thinking about the funnel, it's not the very top of the funnel, it's really in the consideration or decision making part of the funnel where they say, oh, they've got this program that will do this even better. The interesting thing about the program, though, it's not for anyone who comes in with a lot of AP or concurrent enrollment. It's really for students that did not excel in high school. And so students that come in with 30 credits, sometimes they come in with that because there's a lot of concurrent enrollment in Utah. They'll say, oh, this isn't going to be for me. Oh, that's too bad. I wish I'd known about this before. So, and those are only anecdotes, but I think when we look at the data, the retention rate is extremely high, and it's attracting the right kinds of students. It's not the top of the top, but it's taking these sort of middle students that are, I don't know, anywhere from 18 to 23 on the ACT, and it's giving them an experience that's making them realize that they can be successful. And so they're performing better, they're retaining better, and we just found that so we're expanding it as much as possible. But again, we have constraints in terms of the buildings and the seats and the lab space, so.
And so, Ian, when you were at Nazareth, we talked about Nazareth's response to Excelsior. And I remember you talked about the emphasis was on the program, not the entire institution. And I wonder if you could talk about that, and I'm curious if it applies as well at RIT.
Yeah, absolutely. And getting back to this idea where, when you look at your reality in the context of a market, is it believable that you're going to convince a student and a family to generate interest based on brand? The proliferation of messages just makes that very, very difficult. And when you look at how students shop, typically they'll shop, look at the College Board site, the first filter is programs, right? Mm-hmm. And so when you have programs that are either innovative or differentiating or either are unmarketed, it gives you a chance to, kind of create the attention of someone who otherwise may not be interested or even aware of your organization, of your institution. So yes, at Nazareth, we took our 60 majors and chopped them up into essentially 8 sub-brands, subgroups, and then again managed that as if they were independent product lines, and then followed price promotion and all those pieces all the way through. And it's quite similar to RIT as well. Just the mix is a lot broader. And then, the challenge with RIT is how do we, not cannibalize the value of the technical and the engineering brand, but put a broader spotlight on things that are really, really super high quality that students should be aware of and find value in if they're only, aware of them.
Kathy, how do you think about this in the Alfred context? And you mentioned returning to more of a focus on ceramics?
Yeah, sure, program does matter to some students, and so what Alfred has been, so we've had sort of what seems like the opposite problem of RIT is that we've had historically strong programs in engineering and in art and design with the grounding in ceramics, and we've kind of run away from that, kind of too quick to say, yeah, you know, Alfred University, we're all about ceramics, but let me tell you about these other things too. When I think what we should have been doing is what we're kind of embarking on now is really owning and promoting ceramics in addition to our other programs more broadly. Let me, however, speak on behalf of the many, many students that we get at the university and that are at your campuses that look at other things first, what I think all of the people in the room would call secondary attractors. I was an athlete, I was recruited for sports, I was a good student as well, but I have to say, I was looking for connections, I was looking for co-curricular connections first. That had to be right for me, because I will be very honest, I was a biology major. I knew I wanted to study that, but I figured lots of schools have biology majors. Not every school was going to have the coach that I wanted or the feel that I wanted, and so I want to speak on behalf of those students. There are more out there than I think many folks want to admit. I think you all know this. I think not all faculty are as aware of this. So I do think program matters in some disciplines and for some students, but I am not going to say it's for all, and I may not even say it's for a majority.
Can I add a point?
Please.
I think one of the things that we haven't done well collectively is how do you articulate value to the undecided student?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, that is the largest share of the market, to your point. And, you know, really specific product lines or pathways for the undecided student seems like a really, really unique opportunity.
And actually, I think there may be a lot of students who do not know exactly what they want to do. And some of them may want to find the perfect coach or whatever the other activities are, but with all the talk about be afraid if you don't have a job plan from day one, I think it is hard for a student who wants to go someplace where they can explore paths and find the right path, but not be pressured to do so on day one.
Right.
Stephanie, what trends do you notice in terms of what colleges are putting forward, whether it's programs or other things, to try to attract new groups of students?
Well, I don't know that I've got great trend data, except to say we see the most success with our clients who decide to be different, dare to be different, or to own the competencies and reputations that they've previously cultivated. So hats off to Alfred for re-embracing ceramics. I think that that's fantastic. I had a really wonderful experience at Sterling College in Vermont. Is Jacob here? We were talking about Vermont. And that's an institution of about 150 students. I think it's still the smallest in North America, or in the US at least. And they have 6 majors and 1 kind of freestyle approach. And I think I love pointing to them as an example because they are true to themselves in every facet of the experience. And going there and working with them on their website redevelopment project, doing some SEO, we got to live in community. We got to go to the lunchtime community meeting where their cafeteria, if you will, dining hall, used dishware from thrift stores all around Vermont. And somebody brought to the meeting a mug that had a Native American person in a headdress, and there were a bunch of them, and it was left over from some high school reunion, and she lifted them up and said, "This is not what we stand for," and the mugs were gone. I mean, they talked about what would be then the most ethical way to get, you know, it went on. Anyway, owning who you are, what you do particularly well, and articulating that consistently, persistently, I think is the best possible approach with programs. But as we were talking about at breakfast, I think the trend in leadership is just panic and trying to get more, no matter what more looks like. And I think in the long run, that doesn't pay off.
Please.
One of the things that I think, Stephanie, one of the gifts to higher ed is the e-expectations work that you do. And one of the themes that at least has sparked with me, and I think it's something that's worth mentioning, is the value of authenticity in imagery and in copy and all of those pieces. So thank you.
Oh,
Yeah.
you're welcome. It's really more fun than I should be able to have under work, but
But I mean, authenticity, I do think particularly 17 and 18-year-olds are very suspicious of anything they get and love to poke holes in it. And I've said this at other meetings with admissions folks, and I'll say it for your benefit again. Do not deal with diversity issues with Photoshop, please. And every year we write about the college that isn't as diverse as it would like and takes 4 happily walking white students and gives one of them a new identity. And it always, I think it always comes out, and it's just bad. Don't do it. But even beyond that, I think students look for something that feels real, and how you do that, I think, is tricky.
can I throw in?
Please.
I would say in the photography study that we did in our 2018 data, once again, we saw preference for images without people. A rooftop shot, a snowy image of a building on Princeton's campus, and a sports arena were the top performing images for male, female, juniors, seniors in our study. And when I take this research onto a campus and have the opportunity to speak with prospective students or sometimes parents, I check it and say, hey, look at your peers said this in a quantitative way, tell me why. And they point to the corresponding, 3-under tree, happy, shiny student with backpack and cool Beats headphones now would be the way to do it, and say, you're trying too hard with those. These open space quad shots, even the drone shots, give me space to walk into the picture and see myself there, and give me context clues about fit. Oh, look at that arena, it's huge. I hate big crowds, no thank you. Or I want to be a part of that kind of athletic community, that's the right size for me.
I was just gonna, it made me think of a story. We have not been guilty of photoshopping. God, I hope that I'm aware of. But that was really driven home recently. We had two alumni give us a wonderful opportunity for a matching gift. It's called the Stonewall Fund, and it's to help students who are facing financial difficulties at college because of their identification as LGBTQ plus, or X as they call it. And so, and if so, I'm hoping that this doesn't happen often, but it does happen on all of our campuses, I think, that students come out and are then rejected by their family or told, you can't go to that school anymore because they are having this horrible influence, come back and we'll change you, whatever. Mm-hmm. There are many students who become homeless and really need a lot of help. So these two alums established a Stonewall Fund, which is a matching gift program, very generous, really a wonderful opportunity that I get to administer, which is again a great privilege. And so to promote it, we did a massive publication, and we went and got stock imagery, and it looked of students, 4 or 5 students, and it looked good, but they didn't look like our students at all. I mean, our students, we all have, not like our students have a particular look. I think the distinctive thing about Alfred is our students look quirky, and there's a lot of very, very visible difference and uniqueness on campus that is just wonderful, and they just didn't look like our students. And so we very quickly went out and found our own students who identify as part of that community, with the understanding, this is going to be on a brochure, are you out, are you comfortable, here are some of the possible repercussions, and many students opted not to, but we had 4 students who chose to be part of this publication, and they didn't look like, they didn't look modelly. They would never have been chosen for stock imagery, and there certainly is a danger that somebody might be like, wow, these students look maybe a little weird or something. They're our students, and they're us, and that's authentic. And so I'm thrilled with the way the publication turned out, and I know the students are so proud, and and it's garnering some great donations for us, so I'm excited.
That's great. I mean, you can also have problems even without Photoshop. We wrote about a university that created a poster for international students, and it featured actually their Asian American students who didn't appreciate the implication that they weren't Americans. And so even though there's nothing negative about the poster or wanting international students, people pay a lot of attention to this. The other thing I notice when I get all these view books and links to websites, based on my semi-scientific survey, it never rains at American colleges. and while a place like RIT or Alfred has periodic scenic snow, there's never slush.
It's just not in our color palette.
It's
Right.
not in the color palette. And the thing is that, and I understand that at a certain level, but on the other hand, if you can't deal with a little slush, I'm not sure you should go to RIT. And it is odd to me the things that people seem embarrassed about. I remember many years ago, again in my hometown, there was talk of changing the name of the University of Rochester to, I think it was to Eastman University, because George Eastman was a great benefactor. Some of the people said, we don't want Rochester in the name, they'll think it's cold. And I was like, but it is cold. And people do need to, I think, acknowledge realities. I also just wanted you to each speak from different kinds of perspectives about how you're seeing the cost issue and the loan issue and sort of the ROI issue play out. What kinds of questions are you getting? How are you responding? Ellen?
Yeah, well, I think it's almost existential. It's like we do not want to go into debt. So that's kind of a tenet of the predominant religion in Utah, that there's no debt. They don't like debt. It's not something that they want to do. So most of our students have jobs. So we have to be more nimble in how to create classes that are going to work for them. We were bolstered recently in the last 3 weeks, showing that Utah had the lowest level of student debt, and Southern Utah, of all the universities, has probably the lowest. So I think it's a benefit for us overall, but we talked about it, that it's like the best investment you can possibly make. And the way I always position it is, you don't go into debt for a depreciating asset. And you are an appreciating asset, and a college education is an appreciating asset. Don't go into debt for those Beats headphones or the fancy clothes. Go into debt for an education because it's worth it. But I think in a lot of ways, President Wyatt also shows a fancy pickup truck, and he talks about the value of the pickup truck and where the value of the pickup truck is going to be in 15 years versus where the value of your degree will be in 15 years when they're about the same price. So, and I think that's kind of helping steer the conversation. So it's great that we're inexpensive, but on the other hand, most of our students are working, and the number one reason that they say when we are not able to retain them is they're leaving for financial reasons.
And so at RIT, you have the advantage that many of your graduates are in fact entering lucrative fields. Yep. How does the cost and loan issue play out?
Yeah, I mean, the balance of, ability to pay and willingness to pay, and the science around that is arguably the most difficult part of the job, because in the end, it is a value-based decision. The inputs go into it. Was my experience great when I visited? Then you get, a credit in the bank, if you will, in terms of buyer behavior. And so it's a tight walk, and it goes back to program for us as well. If all things being equal, sometimes we have to subsidize, the financial aid package for one program because it's commoditized, and the overlap is, very high quality and expensive publics. On the same thread, we have some really, really distinctive programs that, if the family has the ability to pay, they will pay a little bit more, to be very candid with you. So the science around that is very, very difficult. I think the thing that we need to be aware of, as well as the market, is that when you look at default rates, in terms of what are the drivers of default rates on student loans, the number one data point is whether or not they graduated. And what that, when you look at the information, that actually skews a lot of the default rate narrative within society. So the loan piece and then the debt piece, to me, has to be in the same conversation, or how are we graduating students at our institutions as well as across the nation. And I feel like the Fed, as well as the states, is going to start identifying that as the most important metric. And if we're not managing it, there's going to be all kinds of operational risk, regulatory risk, as well as market risk.
And it really differs so much by program. So I know we have some health professions oriented institutions here. And you know, if you're a nursing student and borrowing gets you out a year earlier, that is almost certainly a wise financial move, because you're going to get a job on day one if you pass your licensure exam, and delaying graduation has real opportunity costs. But there is this debt aversion thing that is hurting. Kathy, how do you see it?
Yeah, I would agree with what both my colleagues have said so far, and what you just said about the debt aversion. That is very real. It's anecdotal and backed up with pretty much every student that I talk to, particularly ours. You know, they're really dealing with some significant financial pressure. I think the issue of financial literacy is one. You know, we're a little behind the curve, I think, in terms of comprehensive financial literacy for our students. Let me give a shout out to RIT. My older son went to that school, had a wonderful experience, top to bottom. But one of the things that happened in his junior year is that a financial aid counselor came into the class and just talked to them about financial literacy and what to expect. And I really think that needs to happen more. I am always amazed when I sit with a group of students, regardless of class year major, and I ask them, how are you paying for your education? And they don't know. Yeah. And these are students who are financially really struggling. Their parents have struggled so much to get them to the university, and I think they are trying to perhaps shield their children from the struggle, and so as a result they don't talk to them about it. And so that is amazing to me, how many students don't know. I will say also that we lose students, and again this is both anecdotal and tends to be backed up by data, who feel as though they're wasting their parents' money if they don't have a major declared. So the pathway for undecided students is absolutely critical, that we say, you know, come in, this is a great place to explore and you should explore, but by the time you're at whatever point you determine, you will have a major chosen, and we will assure you that you know, that you will get a job. And I feel very comfortable making those assurances, because when students feel like they're just floundering, that's not going to work. So for us, we've really tried to work on ROI. We've established a new program called APEX, which provides funding up to $2,000 for anyone in their junior or senior year to take in experiential learning, you know, internship, co-op, study abroad, undergraduate research, and this is really important to parents, and sometimes not as much to students as I would have thought, but to parents, saying, you know, you are going to get some sort of experience that's going to help you with that job market, and you know, this is one way that we do care about your return on investment. So I think that is an absolutely crucial discussion.
Stephanie, what do you see among the colleges that you work with?
I see in that group, but beyond, opportunity to not be afraid to write about money. I see a lot of really awesome websites until you go skidding into the financial aid section, or admissions sections that just link over to financial aid and don't have the same kind of care and attention in positioning and quality content that needs to happen. You know, we get connected with our financial aid officers, and they tend to maybe not be as creatively driven as sometimes my admissions colleagues are. And then they also come out and say, but you know, federally, you have to have these words on all of these pages, and it just tamps down. I think that there's huge opportunity to talk plainly and clearly about the realities of affording the education that you're offering at your institutions. I think there's also, to your point, an opportunity to teach them about what the considerations should be. So one of the paths that we walk as admissions marketers is how does enrollment go at our institution? How selective are we? When should you be doing things? You know, should you start as a freshman, a sophomore, a junior in high school? And the same with financial stuff. I remember doing my very first view book for Wilkes University and having to work with our director of financial aid, and she and I just locked horns for a long time because she had very, very clear things she needed to articulate, and I had very clear things that I wanted to articulate, and we couldn't get connected. Eventually, there was a photo shoot, and I turned on some music to kind of get her a little loosened up, and it was Rosemary Clooney that brought Rachel and I together. And
You know, there are a few things just to follow up on that the panelists just said. One is it relates to what students don't know. And think, for instance, on what students and parents don't talk about. So think about the net price calculator, which is supposed to be this great tool to help students. And those of you who maybe are parents, ask yourselves, do your children know how much you earn? And the number of students who are putting in completely wrong information into the net price calculator, and it won't correct it. It's not going to the IRS and saying, what did the mom and dad really earn? I also think there's a really important connection. This relates to something that Kathy was talking about earlier in academic advising and debt. You know, as Ian said, the worst debt is debt without degree. Similarly, the best way to minimize debt is to graduate in 4, not 5 or 6. And students don't realize the implications of their choices. We wrote about a college that as a requirement to change majors, regardless of whether you are on financial aid, you must see a financial aid counselor. And the counselor then looks at the student's transcript and says, well, because for this new major you have none of the prerequisites, you will not graduate in 4, so how are you going to pay for that extra semester or year? And you know, I don't want to criticize people who change majors. Sometimes it's absolutely the right thing for a given student, but to do so without eyes open about the implications is wrong, and I'm not sure a lot of colleges are putting all of this together. I want to get you all involved in the discussion now, and you can ask about anything, or I mean really with this panel you can ask about anything at all, even if we haven't talked about it, although it should relate in some way to higher ed. Time for your questions and comments. And again, if you could introduce yourselves.
Hi, my name is Dylan Bittaker. I'm from Lindenwood University. We're located in Missouri. And my question, we talk a lot here about like niche and like identifying your school's voice. Can you give me any advice on how to really start that identification process on finding what your school may be better at or really can identify with from a voice perspective?
Please.
One of the things, getting back to this program concept, that we've done at Nazareth as well as Champlain, is sitting down with program directors and walking them through a rubric that essentially helps them understand what are the distinctive value drivers of their program, and then also demystify kind of what the rest of the market competes on. So if you take biology as an example, and you know, oftentimes there can be an inflated perception of our lab spaces are the best in our category. Well, they may not be. And having the best lab spaces in the market from which you're competing, that's a box that people just kind of check. It's not a differentiator. And so by partnering with faculty, I think what that does is that you kind of get an understanding of some hidden gems that you may not be aware of that you can position to the marketplace. But more importantly, or as important I should say, is you start building a culture of collaboration on helping your academic folks really understand the marketplace so that as they're making decisions, they can think about the stuff that you've informed them on for future investment or future programs or curriculum changes, et cetera. So just one thought.
I couldn't agree more. I think I work for Ruffalo Noel Levitt, so we always start with data, but if you're doing anything with student satisfaction to understand the gaps between what they think is important and what they're most satisfied, smaller gaps are marketing truths, larger gaps are retention opportunities. I think another simple thing that you can do, this is an awesome summer intern job, and maybe it's too late for that, you'll get a fall intern, it'll be okay, is competition study. And looking at what your competing institutions are, and that's tricky in and of itself. Who are your competitors? They may be varied by program or college, and there may be true cross-app competitors, so looking in on clearinghouse data to see where you have actual cross-app, but then also understanding I call them the grown-ups, but your leadership and what aspirational competitors they would always like for you to be considering, and put yourself on their mailing list and look at the themes and messages that they're offering up, and please do not copy or just go down that path, but use that in critical thought to say, well, everybody's saying we're the small university delivering the big education. We're not going to say that. We're going to talk over here and we're going to say, hey, it's a different experience. You know, Sterling, again, I think is a really great exemplar in that way.
Can I offer a suggestion that's student affairs-y, and so it's maybe a little more like, it's not data-driven, we'll just say. One of the things we did a few years ago, trying to really get at what is the Alfred University experience, and what are the commonalities. You know, we tended to be an organization that really identified by our academic areas, our schools and colleges, rather than a whole. So we went out and decided to ask students, faculty, staff, what's your Alfred University bucket list? What do you have to do before you graduate or before you leave the university? And got a really wide cross-representation of people handing in their bucket lists. And then we said, what are the commonalities across the institution that faculty, staff, and students alike say that they have to do? And you know, you get some fun social things, of course, and some traditions, but you also got things like, make sure you take a marketing class with Dr. Rummel. Make sure you take a glass blowing class because glass blowing is something that you can't get just off the street. And starting to put those things together, really the stars start to shine in terms of those common, wonderful, quirky sometimes, things that everyone in your institution kind of agrees is special and people have to do before they leave.
It's great advice.
I think that's genius. I get so frustrated when we then take it to committee and feel like we have to be democratic and egalitarian and collegial, and then it all becomes tamped down. And so I think it's quite brave to make those choices based on not data, but good qualitative information.
Thanks. I don't want to say that our all of our choices were made on the basis of bucket lists, but it was a wonderful piece to add to the other work that we're doing. So I thought it was kind of cool.
Ellen?
I think what I'm hearing in the question is, how do we begin the process of differentiation?
Right.
Would that be? Okay. So I think a great place to start, obviously, is data. Find out what are the students saying about their experience, what are faculty and staff saying about their experience, what are alumni saying about the experience, and what are people who chose not to go there saying about why they chose not to go. So I began with a pretty simple, it was almost like a bingo card. And I just handed them out to faculty and staff and students all over campus, and it had different words like caring or aristocratic or underdog, and it had certain words, and people would just circle what they believed about it, and then they would put an X mark in what they didn't believe, and it was clear what you were supposed to do. Like, this is who we are and this is who we are not. And I was really surprised we piloted it. So we sent out a little pilot survey. I think we had 80 or so. And then when we went larger with it, we found that it was almost exactly the same in terms of percentages. And we said, wow, we are not talking about how we're a caring campus. The number one thing is that everybody seems to care. And that's not something that we were ever even talking about when we're talking about personalized attention and great outdoors and the other things. And it's like, oh, we are a caring campus community. So we went out with Caring Campus, and it really resonated with the students, and it really resonated with parents as well. Like, oh, okay, so if I send my kid there, yes, they'll be safe, but somebody will be there to care about them. So I thought it was really helpful to start with kind of really broad categories of what are we and what aren't we, and then kind of whittle it down from there to find out. So now we actually have, as one of our brand statements on the front page of our website, that we're a caring campus community. That's the very first thing, because that's what everybody said we were.
There are a few things that I noticed. One, I think it's really important that you're asking that question. When we write about colleges that are in financial dire straits, a frequent pattern is the college used to depend on a certain pattern in terms of which high school students would apply and enroll. And this is true private as well as public. At most privates, a large share of the student body comes from nearby. And then you have certain other patterns that, particularly say in the Northeast, many Roman Catholic families used to send their children to Catholic high schools and then on to Catholic colleges. And those patterns aren't reliable anymore. In some ways, it's a good thing that a Catholic high school student can aspire to go anywhere. But you can't rely on that. The big danger I see in a lot of these analyses, and I think Stephanie used the phrase aspirational peers, which I really like that phrase. I find when I talk to admissions people and presidents and ask them about their peers, many times what I get is their aspirational peers. And I think aspirational peers serve a really good purpose, but that colleges delude themselves if they confuse their aspirational peers from their real peers. And again, it depends, particularly say if you're a public college and your president is trying to prove that your faculty are underpaid, well, it's very useful to have a set of aspirational peers who are paid more. But in terms of real analysis, that just fools you. And so I think this requires a kind of honesty that is, for some institutions, presumably those not represented in this room, difficult. Other questions?
Hi, my name is Maggie DeBaugh. I'm from Crosby Scholars, a college access nonprofit in North Carolina. My question is, do you all partner with college access networks in your area to help combat these challenges and issues that you have at your higher ed level, and what kinds of programs do you guys do with those organizations?
So one of the tactics that we went through at Nazareth actually was looking at and analyzing the success of the POSSE program, but realizing we couldn't afford it. So we took that model and essentially did it ourselves. So knowing that channels can be a really effective way, whether through community-based organizations or charter school networks or groups of schools that are serving the underserved, building really deep roots within those organizations, and not only for the trust of the students, but for the trust of the stakeholders and the leaders within those organizations. And what we found is that those relationships are as important as they are with the students, because they want to know that they're sending their students to places that they have the best chance of success, they're going to be cared for. If times get tough, there'll be budgetary support when needed, and making sure that the institution is doing the best that they can to get them over the finish line for graduation. So our approach has been very much a channel-driven approach, partnering with organizations like yourself.
Just one thing I would add, I find these local organizations to be enormously helpful in identifying trends and identifying the problems faced by students whom they help. But from a public policy perspective, while they're doing great work, they're not going to solve the problem. And people talk about like what should, and this came up earlier today, what should higher ed be doing on K-12? Right. To me, the perhaps the biggest issue is inequity in college counseling in high schools. And when you look at the ratios of students to counselor at wealthier and less wealthy institutions, and that doesn't even get into private schools or private counselors, there are just so many missed opportunities there. And so if there's an issue to get involved on, asking why your local high schools, while it's great that they can use the expertise of these nonprofits, why do they have a certain ratio? And even that understates it, because so many high schools, the counselors are dealing with non-college issues, which is important too. And if you looked at the real ratio of people focused on helping with college or career readiness, it's just pretty disgraceful inequity.
I think the early FAFSA data
Yes.
after year one reinforces that the early FAFSA
Yes.
program, for all the great reasons, was really designed to improve access. And in reality, what it's done so far is provide faster access for those who have needs.
Yes.
That's right.
Other questions, comments?
Of the tuition reset, because it sort of peels back this idea that like, oh, maybe our institution isn't worth what we think it is. So are there variables you think that make for a better or more successful tuition reset than not? And is it just a passing fad, or do you think it's going to continue as we are sort of in this
Any of you
environment?
done tuition resets?
We haven't raised, we have tier 1 and tier 2 tuition, so the tier 1 is from the state, and then the tier 2 is the university. And the previous administration raised tuition sometimes double digits over the course of 7 years, and they were wondering why there was falling enrollments. But the current administration has kept tuition level, the tier 2 tuition, and tier 1 raised slightly this year. So we're holding the line on tier 2.
Does R&L advise tuition resets, or are you all skeptical?
Let's see, I'll answer professionally, then personally. Professionally, we do research with clients that are considering tuition resets and help them use good information to make a decision at that level. I think the challenge is what is the health of the institution's brand, and what have they done already to position value and talk about cost before they do a reset. And I think that the tendency when talking with schools that are considering a reset is to think, well, this is going to be such a flash that they'll be blinded and they won't see these other parts that are maybe not as whole or complete in terms of branding and marketing. And they may indeed get some good local, regional attention on that. Hey, wow, why are they doing that? But they very rarely think through the implications of the questions that are raised by, well, what have you done to the value? How can you afford to offer it at a lower price now? And what about, I just paid that full price. I'm an alum, and I might not think you need my money if you're lowering tuition. So there are so many implications, and if you come at it from a position of dearth rather than wealth, I think it creates more problems than it solves.
So when we've reported on the trend, and it definitely seems that more colleges are doing it, the commonality is that they're colleges with very high discount rates. And we reported on one college I won't name here, where they said we cut tuition by 40%. And we determined that there were no students at that college the prior year who had paid more than the reset figure. So no one actually was saving money. And I think one of the issues that colleges face, and this has to do with, when people hear about different people paying different rates, is the trustworthiness. And I've noticed that many of them seem to creep back up after. Then you have, to me, one of the most interesting experiments on tuition in recent years was by Middlebury College. And Middlebury pledged about 10 years ago, under its prior president, to only increase tuition by CPI plus 1 percentage point. And this was in a period of relatively low inflation, and none of their competitors matched. And so over the course of 4 or 5 years, their competitors were actually increasing by CPI plus 3. And a gap opened between Middlebury and its competitors, but guess what? They didn't do any better on yield. They do well on yield because they're a good college, but part of the factor is when you are so expensive, you take some of the small cash decisions out, and in fact, Middlebury became convinced it was hurting itself and abandoned the policy. So I am, again, this is great stuff. Journalists love to poke holes in what seem to be popular things, and most of the resets have been fairly easy to poke holes in. I think with that, I think we're pretty much out of time, so will you please join me in thanking these great panelists.
Thank you.